Welcome to the show Brain Rot, What Our Screens Are Doing to Our Minds, a special series from the New Books Network. Here are your hosts, Dr. Karen Messina and Dr. Harry Gill.
Hello. This is Dr. Karen Messina. I'm joined with Dr. Harry Gill for our podcast, Brain Rot, What Our Screens Are Doing to Our Minds. This is part 2 in a series on technoference. And basically what that means is when our technology interferes with our lives and the people with whom we connect and the people who are really important to us. So, episode 9 is losing time, losing ourselves, and grief, ghosts, and getting free of being captives of this fairly new, as Dr. Gillis pointed out, it probably goes back to the television, but in terms of taking our time away, we let it do that, but our digital devices, talking about mainly smartphones and computers fundamentally. So what feelings go along with our lost connections with important people in our lives? That's what we're going to focus on today. Once time is gone, a magic moment with a child, an important moment with a significant other. Once it's gone, it's gone. And unless it's a simple thought and it's a very complex one. A lot of other things that are gone can be retrieved, but lost time cannot. So, Dr. Gill, I know you have a lot of thoughts on this.
Thank you, Dr. Messina. I think I actually just wrote a very short Substack piece on lost time because in a very profound way, I think that all we really have, the only possession that we have is time. From the moment we're born to the moment we're going to die, time just ticks away. And it's inevitable and moves at a predictable pace. And how we use that time is an incredibly important aspect of our life. As such, there are competing forces that want our time, and they want to steal it from us. And in the piece I write about, it started with electrical light, where our time expanded, but then it started shrinking with the onset of radio, and then television entered, and then cable television entered, so people could spend all night watching television. But then when the phones entered, that became a completely different theft of time. Even with television, we had the power to either turn it on or turn it off. And if we turned it on and it managed to engage us, it was for a period of time. The phone actively distracts and actively wants to take our time. And there is that moment of decision. Are we going to give it our time, or are we going to keep our time to ourselves? Connected to that is kind of a pleasure-pain aspect of how brain processes information and experience. Obviously, we're pleasure-seeking organisms. We prefer to enjoy something versus experience the pain. However, ability to grieve, ability to tolerate loss, ability to integrate and move forward is an essential aspect of living. And in the clinical material, I'm sure you share this, Dr. Messina, people consistently these days avoid grief by escaping into technology. So the moments that need to be devoted to worrying about where am I going to find the next job, worrying about am I going to pass this exam, worrying about is my wife cheating on me, my mother died and I feel really sad. The country as I know it has changed and I feel very sad. Those feelings have to be experienced. They cannot be put in a bottle and hidden away because you are on Instagram.
Yeah.
Because when you wake up from Instagram or computer games with young people very frequently, the problem and the pain is still there. It doesn't go away. And so you have essentially wasted, quite literally wasted, a portion of your life, and you're stuck with the same problem that needs to be resolved, but now you have less time. because you have given it away. So if we really think of time as a commodity that is not endless and abundant, we get into a very sort of judicious use of our time and allocate it appropriately to grief, loss, anxiety, and the joy of the moment.
I was just thinking about how in therapy, I know we tell people one way or the other that whatever difficulties they have gone through, they have to be processed. And the way you do that is by talking about it. And I think there's a risk. I feel that there's a risk in talking about whether it's technoference or just generally speaking, how problematic it is when people are plugged in all the time. But I don't think we talk too much about talking about those feelings and the losses that they have experienced, although they may not even be aware that it's a lost experience. But there's no way around it. When you're on a computer game, a phone, uh, scrolling through your Instagram or X or any other kind of platform, you can't, as we said, you can't get the time back, but there is a loss there if you consider what else you might have been doing. And I'm not talking about busyness things that you might have been doing, but connections, human connections that you might have had. If you really think about that, I spent an hour on my phone playing a game, but what could I have been doing? If I don't have any friends around, I could have at least had a conversation, a real 20-minute conversation with a person, a good friend. Better yet, if you can be with that person at a restaurant, in a park, going for a walk. Or if there isn't another person around, there's also nature to connect with. You can go on a walk in the park, and you can take in so much more than if you're on a digital device. My main point is it's important to process what has been lost during this time when you've been doing something else with something digital.
To add and expand on the theme, beyond the connection, I find I work a lot with young people, particularly young adults that have difficulties of adulting, the new term. And it is interesting to see that they grew up with phones and they're habituated into avoiding feelings and avoiding anxiety by using the phone. And in our world, there's a concept of masochism in which people self-punish or self-sabotage. Self-sabotage is a very modern word that most people are familiar with. And it is fascinating to see to what extent there is going to be an active process of engaging with the phone to essentially waste time, while at the same time inflicting pain to yourself because you know you're supposed to be studying for that exam. And you know that if you fail that exam, parents will be upset. And you know that you're going to be feeling bad about yourself, and eventually you're going to fail out of college, and you're going to go home, and everybody's going to be unhappy. So that the skill is very simple: to understand the value of time, the inflexibility of its existence, and what the consequence of avoiding a feeling really is, because it can be quite devastating. Children are not raised, friendships disappear, depressions occur, suicidal ideation happens. These are dire, dire consequences of something that feels very innocuous. I'm playing Minecraft, I'm playing Fortnite, I'm following Kim Kardashian, whatever foolishness it is that we waste our time on. If we see it as a pleasure that can be engaged for a moment, like in the old days when we had a martini, that was one martini, or maybe two. But if you're having 15, it's not a good thing. Similarly, if you spend half an hour playing a game or an hour, fine. But if you're spending 15 hours, actual examples from clinical material, practicing Fortnite so you can make this wonderful amount of money that will never happen, your life is imploded.
Yeah.
Then you end up in offices like mine or Dr. Messina's trying to put your life back together.
I just like to add that while young people have grown up with digital devices, that it's not only that age group that is addicted to digital devices. I mean, we might not think about it this way, but if you think about older people, they can watch TV for hours on end, one show after the other after the other. And what else could they be doing? Now, they may not be on smartphones, or they may be, but they may just be watching too much TV when they could, whether they're in a nursing home or whether they're in their own home, they could contact a neighbor and see if the neighbor wants to go for a walk. And if it's a lovely spring day, could be fall day, they can look at the changes in the season and talk to the friend about a myriad of things versus just sitting watching somebody else have a life on TV without living their own lives. And if they really stop and think about that, there's really loss in that. If you could be with a person versus watching a show that you may have watched the same exact episode before, or even if it's a new one, how much you're really getting from that versus being with a friend or perhaps talking with a grandchild. I think there's a significant difference. I know there's a significant difference.
To add to that, from neuroscience perspective, the initial response of a brain in a thought of let me reach out to my neighbor is some degree of anxiety. Is my neighbor going to want to spend time with me? Is this a good weather day to go for a walk? So there's some effort that is actually an exercise for the brain. So the brain is going to avoid that because there's some effort involved in that, and it's going to go for the easy, which is sit and process information. There's no movement required. It is interesting. It is pleasurable. And as you said, it never ends. One of the fascinating changes that increased Netflix stock price dramatically was the invention of continuous watching. So we have a term, binging, where we don't even have to press a button to see the next episode. It just rolls around and keeps going. And kids in particular are falling prey to this, adults as well. But kids are up all night. They're unable to learn the next day. They're tired. They're exhausted because it was an endless loop of that particular series. And it's easy and it's pleasurable and it's fun, except it's not. It's a waste of time.
Yeah.
And the brain does not learn anything from watching television. The brain does not really learn anything from scrolling through TikTok or Instagram. Maybe you learn something by reading what somebody said on X, maybe, but it is not an engaging function where the brain has to do something to integrate information and react to it.
Right.
It becomes, truly from a neuroscience perspective, it becomes garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
As I used the example in our last conversation, why do I have to check how tall Tom Cruise is endlessly for 60th time? Because I just don't take a moment to remember it. If I really cared about it, I would remember it, but it becomes like my brain is sort of in the device anymore.
Well, there's so much more to talk about, but maybe one thing we can try to cover just for a couple of minutes is what people can do about it, about all this digital input. And I'll start with, they can turn off notifications. You can have designated periods when you check your phone. It doesn't have to be every 5 minutes or every 2 minutes. So you can turn off notifications and have specific times when you check messages. It doesn't have to be constant. So that's one thing. Maybe we can switch off on these suggestions. Dr. Gill, what else can people do?
Fundamental principle, be aware of time. And in the Substack that I mentioned, I've give my usual advice, which is have analog clocks everywhere. Have those arms moving. Be aware of the passage of time. A digital number on the phone itself doesn't really mean anything. It's a number. But when you have a physicality of an hour arm that has moved twice around the circle and you're still in the phone, you'll be aware that you spent 2 hours on the phone. Similarly, one of the ways that phones have entered our life is that we have to use them for everything, booking a dinner, getting an Uber, but it doesn't mean that it has to be on our body or within the arm reach all the time. Usual conversation I have with kids is set the alarm clock to wake you up in the morning because they oversleep. And then they say, well, yeah, sure, I'd set the alarm clock. Like, do you set the alarm clock or do you set the alarm on your phone? And then we have a little conversation about the alarm on the phone, which means when the phone rings, they pick up the phone, they turn off the alarm, and then they check the Instagram and all of their messages. And then 2 hours later, they're still in bed and they didn't take a shower and they feel bad and they missed the first term. It is a cascade of events that with a little bit of hygiene can be changed. So the phone goes somewhere else away from us. We can buy a radio, we can buy a CD player, because another argument is I use my phone to listen to music. You can actually do very simple things to make phone into a communication device and not your living partner that fulfills every single need during the day. So put it away and go reach for it when you're ready to reach for it. Put yourself in control over the phone versus relinquishing yourself to the control of the device.
Intentionality is really important. And what I mean by that is being intentional with the use of digital devices. Of course, at work, we have to use them and we probably aren't intentional. But during times when it's our time, our free time, it's important to take breaks, to get up, do some exercising, walk around. You can do this during the day as well when you're working. But look out of the window. You might see a pretty bird. That has a lot more meaning than scrolling through your social media messages. So be intentional with the use of smartphones. And maybe I will slip this one more thing in. Prioritize sleep. As Dr. Gill said, and it's not just kids. People will get hooked on a game and they'll stay up into the wee hours, continuing with the game. And then if they have to go to work the next day or whatever they're doing the next day, they can't get up. If they do force themselves to get up, they feel lousy. They get off to a bad start. So it's really important to turn off anything that's digital way before one intends to go to sleep. I have a patient who tells me he literally clicks off the TV and turns out the lights and tries to go to sleep. The next time I see him, he'll tell me how he hasn't been able to sleep at night. Well, it's certainly no wonder to me that he can't sleep. He's affected by blue light. The melatonin in his brain is not being produced. So he's trying to switch something from one state to the other, his brain specifically, and it just doesn't work that way. You know a lot about that, Dr. Gill. What about from a neuroscience perspective? What's going on there when people just turn something off and try to sleep?
In addition to the blue light phenomena, which is direct and chemical, there is also an activation of the brain. When we process information, acetylcholine as a neurotransmitter is secreted and activates our cortex. So our cortex is now highly activated with a chemical that is necessary for us to be alert, to pay attention, to think. And in particular, if we're looking at something that is very engaging and is creating kind of reverberations in the brain that we're thinking about, now we have lots of acetylcholine that has activated the brain. And when we try to go to sleep, we have limited amount of melatonin because of blue light. And the collision of these two neurotransmitters creates greater likelihood you're not going to fall asleep. Then if you turned off the device, you wound down, it means the winding down represents reduction in acetylcholine, which activates the brain. Then whatever amount of melatonin is available would be adequate to put us to sleep. So the disruption is both in terms of melatonin suppression, but it's also an activation of the brain. And the greater the activation, the harder it's going to be to go to sleep, which, to be cynical, is great for psychiatric business because we can then write prescription medication to put people to sleep. But sleep hygiene goes a long way to help people sleep better.
Yes, from a practical standpoint, what do you recommend or what would you recommend in terms of a time frame? Turn all digital devices off at X time. Can you fill in the blank? What is X?
Usually my X, and this is reality-based in which we live right now, is conservative 30 minutes before you intend to go to sleep. And as you said, you have to be very intentional about the time. So, and when I work with kids, they actually respond to this really well. There is a time where they're aware that they need to wake up in the morning. So we back up from that time, 7 or 8 hours, and 30 minutes before that, we turn off the devices when we go to bed, and then we fall asleep, and hopefully we wake up okay and rested next day. So really being aware of that totality of 24 hours and how is it being allocated is important. The other one from, again, just medical perspective, the dropped dead deadline to go to bed would be 12:30, because after that, we're really screwing up with our cortisol secretion, with our testosterone and estrogen secretion. So the next day, we're not going to feel well if we spend too much time awake at night. So our brain really does need to follow a circadian rhythm of sun and night in some reasonable fashion.
Yeah, so I get up, and many people do, at 6:30 a.m. 12:30 a.m. would be too late for me to turn any digital devices off. So it all depends on when a person gets up in the morning.
Back up the clock.
Are you saying an hour before an 8-hour period of trying to sleep, something like that?
Exactly.
Okay, well, I think that will do it for today, and we hope you join us again. We'll be back very soon. Thank you.